like a new season. What? The butterfly event from Lulay. What is that weapon? Oh, it's just a pump. Oh man, the cube monsters are back. That cube is looking crazy right now. What is that Jones?
No, I'm making a cube.
Okay. Maria is making a cube.
I'm making a
She's
cube
gonna
card.
put her cube out there.
There's my little cube card. Isn't it cute? And people are like, get that thing off the battlefield.
You're like, no, it's
No,
my cube
it's
card.
my cube card.
Whoa. Okay.
Off we pop then. Hello and welcome to Lucky Paper Radio. I am your host, Andy. I'm here as always with my co-host, Anthony. Been working diligently on a logic puzzle I posed to him last week, Maddox.
Whoa, you know how long I remember to keep thinking about that? Probably a day.
So you haven't been working on that?
I haven't. I did forget about the logic puzzle.
Do you want the answer now, or?
No, give me another week. / another 6 hours, and then a week minus 6 hours for me to forget about it again.
Okay, well, I'll pose it to our listeners as well, and then they can also work on it on their own time, and maybe we can just reveal it next week on the podcast. So this is a logic puzzle I saw on a Veritasium video on YouTube, which I will link in the show notes, but if you want to actually try to figure it out for yourself, don't watch the video, obviously. It will spoil it.
I very carefully went and tried to Google it without getting, in the search results, the answer to it. It was a little bit difficult.
I don't know if it has an actual proper name. So here's the puzzle. You have 100 prisoners. It's like, the prisoner thing is just flavor text. You have 100 prisoners, 100 people numbered 1 to 100, and you have 100 boxes that are also numbered 1 to 100. And in those 100 boxes, you have 100 slips of paper that are also numbered 1 to 100, but they are distributed randomly in the boxes. So box 2 could have number 73 in it. Box 13 could have number 80. They're just distributed randomly. So one piece of paper, one box, and there's 100 of each of these things. The prisoners are allowed to strategize before the exercise begins, but once the exercise begins, they're no longer allowed to communicate with one another. And what happens is, one by one, a person goes into this room with all these boxes, opens up to 50 boxes of their choice, and if they find their number, they've succeeded. If they do not find their number, they have failed. And the question is there a strategy, or what is the strategy you can give these prisoners in order to maximize their chances of success, of all 100 of them finding their number in 50 selections from those boxes?
Because as a baseline, if they each go in and open a random box, or a random half of the boxes, right, then they're all having like a 50% chance to be right. So you multiply that a couple times, and it's like a ridiculously small
never gonna
possibility
happen
for success,
yeah,
right?
Never going to happen that 100 people are going to basically like win a coin flip,
Right.
in a row.
So does each person... Oh, wait. Okay, so two questions. Boxes are getting opened. Does the second person then open 50 of the 99 remaining boxes?
No, all the boxes are then resealed before
So
the next
it's
person
always
enters
a
the room.
50-50 chance or whatever.
Yeah, the room is in the same state when every person enters the room. Nothing changes about the room state.
So they can't communicate, but does each person get to see which boxes the person before them opened?
No, they go into the
don't.
room
It's
alone,
totally...
one at a time.
Okay, well, I have no idea.
I would never have figured this out. I'm in the position of like giving the answer here as if I know anything. I just watched this video. I never would have figured this out on my own. It's really fascinating. I gave you this one clue. I'll give the listeners too, Anthony, which is a very, very, very subtle clue, which is just that it matters that the people are numbered. That's an important feature of this experiment. Do you have any other questions that listeners might have? We can clarify so this puzzle's clear.
I don't think so, and now I'm just off thinking about the old TV show, The Prisoner, with numbered prisoners.
Never heard of it.
Wow. The Big Bubble, you know that cultural reference.
The Big Bubble?
The Big Bubble. The
No.
balloon.
Talking about Bubble Boy?
Similar. It's similar.
That's the only big bubble I'm culturally familiar with is Bubble Boy. This is not a podcast about logic puzzles, though. I mean, strictly speaking. It's a podcast about magic. And this week on the show, thanks to a listener question, and I tried to figure out which listener asked us this question, and I could not find it. It was somewhere in a Reddit thread or a Discord comment. So apologies, listener, if you're the one that asked this question. I wish I could credit you. But the question, I think, was just, what other magic content do you and I consume? Sometimes we will, on the show, allude to the fact that we have watched some other thing or listened to a podcast. And the question was, what do you guys consume in terms of magic content? So we're going to talk about that, which I think is a good little tidy topic for us.
I think that's a great question just because context matters and where people are coming from and what kind of things people are exposed to shapes the things they talk about. So yeah, I think it's useful to talk about our magic context. I mean, we talk a lot about our relationship to the game and the way we play it, but this is another big component.
Yeah, and for me, it's like it's a big part of how I interact with Magic. I love listening to podcasts. I watch a lot of YouTube. I watch way more YouTube than I watch television. I don't really watch TV. YouTube is my TV. So it's a big part of the way I interact with the game. It's just enjoying stuff that other people have made about it. But first, we're going to do a pack one from a listener-submitted cube. I'm not going to spoil the theme of the cube this week, Anthony. You and I know what it is, but we'll do the pack first, and then maybe we'll talk about where this pack comes from. Starting with the pack is Avacyn's Pilgrim, Dungeon Descent, Anya Merciless Angel, Nesting Worm, Fold into Aether, Earnest Fellowship, Basalt Golem, Volition Reigns, Witch Stalker, Quilled Slagworm, Boom Pile, Strict Proctor, Old Growth Dryads, Wind Dancer, and Sarah Aviary. Just a classic pack, Anthony. A bunch of usual suspects. We see these cards in cubes all the time.
Yeah, of course. Totally normal. I think I'm pretty excited about Avacyn's Pilgrim here, and it's not especially close. I'm also looking over here at Witch Stalker, but those are the two cards that are drawing me in.
Before I give my picks, I want to explain the origins of this cube. We spoke on, I don't know if it was last episode or 2 episodes ago at this point, about the concept of making a random cube and what that would look like and how that might work if you just started with a cube that was a random 360 cards from Magic's history.
In particular, we were wondering about sort of how a cube would develop differently based on if you still played it and iterated it, play tested it, but just started from a completely random sample. It's always funny how like some random little thing that we say in an episode ends up being the thing that takes over the conversation, and then a bunch of people make cubes out of.
It do be like that. So we got a number of listeners that did some sort of exercise in making a random cube list. This one is from listener Red Bay, and this one is not fully random. It is somewhat manicured in the sense that it has the same number of cards per color and a certain number of lands and stuff. But beyond that, it is pretty random. We also had a friend of the show, Mendicant, in the Cube Talk Discord, put together a very interesting project, which did start, I believe, from a fully random list, fully random 360 cards. And what Mendicant is doing is committing to, for 180 days, every day, making one change to the cube based on Cube Cobra's recommended changes and making one change to the cube based on their own personal preferences. And that cube is called Bonsai, as a reference to how you actually like take care of a bonsai tree slowly over time, and also Bons AI because it's randomly generated. And also half the additions are coming from the Cube Cobra Recommender. Brilliant name. Love that. So I'll be following that project with close attention. And I really like this cube that Red Bay sent us. I did a draft of this cube, and I thought my deck was actually pretty okay. I'm surprised at how playable both of these examples at least are. I did drafts of both these cubes on Cube Cobra, and I was like, this deck is like a pretty good draft from a master set level deck. A very good limited deck, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of turns out if you grab a random pile of cards, they do sort of have a reasonable mana curve. They're going to be cards that interact with each other because that's how the game has been designed. So I appreciate that. Yeah, I think we've talked about cubes so much, we've descended into this completely solipsistic meaninglessness of just what does it even matter? Just grab, literally hit the Scryfall random button 15 times.
I feel it's a little bit encouraging because I've told so many people over the years, like, it's going to be fun no matter what. Just put, a cube together. If you're trying to get into cube, do not be afraid of messing it up or having an unbalanced cube. Just like put cards you like, draft them. And truthfully, I've never done that. I don't actually know if it's great advice. I mean, I'm saying it to get people over that intimidating hurdle of like being a cube designer, because really it's just like get cards together, draft them, it's going to be fun. This to me, I feel like is kind of proof in the pudding, right? Like these cubes are okay starting places. There's definitely quite a few duds. Yeah, I would say maybe like 5 to 10% of the cube is like a card with Ripple, a card from Legends, like cards that are just totally out of place and don't make any sense in the context of the cube. But I mean, you have that much space in a cube with as low of a land count as these cubes have to like still hit playables, even if you ignore all those cards. So it's fine.
So what are you taking out of this pack?
I'm not that high on Avacyn's Pilgrim here. I think maybe you are somewhat influenced by the bias of the fact that, like, looking at all these cards, Avacyn's Pilgrim is the best card in the sense that it is the most playable in powerful environments.
Yes, I chose it because it is the best card. That is correct.
Well, big air quotes, right? Because best is never a thing. It's not possible to be objectively the best in any sort of sense. But certainly of all these cards, Avacyn's Pilgrim is the most playable in powerful environments, in powerful EDH decks, in powerful cubes. It pulls its weight and works quite well.
But I think also last time we saw Llanowar Elves in a standard set, in a limited draft set, that was very powerful in that context as well, and I feel like this is going to be much more similar to that.
In Dominaria Limited, were you taking Llanowar Elves over a very good uncommon or a decent rare?
I was probably taking Skittering Surveyor over Llanowar Elves.
I thought Llanowar Elves and Dominaria was fine, and I think it's exactly what Avacyn's Pilgrim is here. I think it's fine.
All right,
and,
so what?
Well, the reason why I want to say is because the reason it's so good in many other contexts is because you are spending a card, Avacyn's Pilgrim, you're spending 1 mana, to essentially get ahead on your curve. You're going to be playing slightly ahead of schedule because now you can play your 3-drop on turn 2, your 4-drop on turn 3, and that strategy works only if you have 3 and 4 drops that are worth going down a card for.
Right.
And in environments where Avacyn's Pilgrim is a supported card, where mana dorks are playable, you can rely on having those 3, 4, and 5 drops that are truly worth being down a card for. You are going to be down a card. You're playing a 1-mana 1/1, which is not going to be playable even in a completely randomized cube. You don't really want a 1-mana 1/1.
So you're saying that this environment is likely to be much less about tempo and more about ultimately individual card quality and card advantage.
That is my thesis from having drafted it only once on Cube Cobra against AIs and looked at the list briefly. I want cards that are just good cards that are going to do something. And so honestly, the 2 cards I'm looking at here, I agree with you on Witch Stalker just because it's a 3-mana 3/3. It's a good rate. It's a very aggressive body that we're not likely to get in other places. I do honestly think that Anya Merciless Angel is perfectly reasonable as like a 5-mana 4/4 flyer. I think that's defensible.
And it has some text that mostly matters in multiplayer, but that actually does do stuff in a 2-player game as well.
It can definitely come up.
It's kind of the literal definition of a win more card. But
Yeah. But the card I'm actually probably taking here might surprise you. I'm taking Volition Reigns. This is a 6-mana control magic that untaps the thing when you gain control of it. So a slightly better control magic for a lot more mana. But that's exactly the kind of card I want in an environment like this, where there's going to be a pretty wide disparity in card quality, and the games are going to be long. I don't think that we're going to have a very aggressive start from any of these decks, and this is a very potent 2-for-1 that also just says, I get the best card on the battlefield, which might be substantially better than the next best card.
I was a little bit spooked by the blue, but I
a lot of
definitely
blue.
agree in terms of the power level here.
It's a lot of blue, and fixing is kind of hard to come by and of dubious quality here, so maybe that's the wrong pick. But I think I'm probably taking that. The argument for not taking that, to me, is that I think you're going to be hard-pressed to get enough playable 2 and 3 drops to have the kind of curve I normally like. And so starting on a 6 when there's a perfectly playable 3-drop here might be a mistake. But it might be enough better that I'm happy to just plan to go big.
Okay, I just got to chime in and say, I don't know how we didn't address the fact that Llanowar Elves, Sarah Angel, like Anya, and in Bolus's Clutches, another 6-mana control magic, were all in Dominaria Limited. And what are you taking there? In Bolus's Clutches, obviously.
Interesting strategy.
So that's what I'm taking. I have no idea if it's correct, but that's what I'm taking out of this cube, which is called Uncurated. We will link this one and Mendicant's Bonds.ai cube in the show notes, and I recommend checking them out and just doing a test draft because you might be pleasantly surprised at how playable your deck seems afterwards.
The other thing that I think is pretty fun about these random cubes is, at least for the very first draft, you're essentially just drafting from the cube that contains all Magic cards, right?
Right. Yeah.
Which is a thing I'd love to see.
That is, people do play vintage rotisserie drafts that way, where you can just pull from the entire collection of Magic cards that have ever existed, which is, I think, an interesting thing. I'd like to try that once. The logistics are kind of tough because I think players that know more about Eternal formats and Magic's long history are just naturally advantaged, which is maybe not the best starting point for a rotisserie draft with players of different backgrounds. But also, it's like having to keep track of what's actually been taken. Like, in our rotisserie template we provide on our website, it hopefully marks the cards out of the cube that have been taken, but you can't just dump 24,000 cards into that spreadsheet and have it work. So
yeah, unfortunately, Google Sheets will be upset about that.
So you're just going to be doing a lot of like Command F and searching for the card you want to take and seeing if someone else took it, which is not that bad. Maybe we should do it sometime.
That's a different thing in that you're still, at least, but we haven't done that. We've always started with a specific list, but from what I've heard, it usually is still just people are taking from the typical vintage cube list, plus 4 or 5 cards that wouldn't be in your classic kind of cards you would consider for a high-powered vintage cube end up being taken. So I don't know how much difference that makes. Whereas here, it's like
interesting thought.
You're getting a pack of totally random cards. It's like, here is a pack of Mystery Booster Ultimate Edition.
Yes, this is very different for sure. I think it's an interesting thought experiment to interrogate how much different a rotisserie draft with the entire card pool of Magic is versus just, the 720 card, MTGO Vintage Cube or whatever. Because theoretically, right, those 720 cards or 540 cards are in there because they're the best Magic cards in history, right? That's why they're in there. But I actually think tons of cards that wouldn't make that cube list would be very, very high picks in a no restrictions
Interesting.
rotisserie draft, because you can just start playing combos that you otherwise would not be able to reliably draft, and building very linear strategies. I mean, just think about burn decks, right? Like, only a certain percentage of the burn spells ever printed are going to make it into any given big vintage cube list. But when you have the long tail of all of Magic's history, you have just as many 3 damage burn spells as you want, just costing slightly more. Some are sorcery speed. You just keep going and going and going until you have a fully dedicated burn deck, right? You can actually just take Sulfuric Vortex, Fire Blast, and just build a burn deck. Not a red aggro deck that has some burn spells, but a actual burn deck. And then maybe you're just playing cards like Price of Progress and Flame Rift and actual Lava Spike, and cards that you would never put, or most people would never put in a cube, now become very playable in your deck. I think that's true of a lot of strategies, but maybe that's an experiment to do someday. Thank you, Red Bay, for actually executing the dumb idea we had on the podcast and sending us in a list. I was very pleasantly surprised. The other thing, Anthony, that really struck me about looking at both of these random lists is the influence of Commander is very felt in Magic's broad history at this point. The number of legendary things that just end up in cubes like this. I think it was in Red Bay's cube. There was some historic or legendary matters card that I was actually able to build around successfully. I think it was Proclamation of Rebirth, the black-white legendary sorcery from Dominari that returns all legendary cards from your graveyard to the battlefield.
That is cool.
Primeval's Glorious Rebirth. I got there. That card, I think, is actually fairly playable. I drafted that card in a deck with, I think, like 8 or 9 legendary creatures, many of which were like some of the best cards in my deck, which is kind of interesting that if you just take a random selection of Magic's history now, it's like there's tons of legends.
I'm just feeling tilted all over again from a draft we did yesterday where there was a blink spell, and I was so excited to blink my own legendary creature that my opponent had stolen, and I would blink it, it would return under its owner's control, and then the card for some stupid reason says non-legendary, and it was rough. It was emotional.
Probably combo with some commander. They didn't want to make an infinite combo.
Exactly.
All right, like I said, thank you, Red Bay. If you have the cube and you want us to do a pack from it on the show, send it to matt@luckypaper.co with your name and pronouns. Anthony, I believe I have a much longer list of Magic content than you do. I think I'm a bit of a media hound, and you like normal things like movies and television and maybe don't have as much time to just watch random streamers on YouTube as I do.
I definitely consume a little bit less Magic content. I also consume, although you do as well, a lot of content about food and comedy and other stuff. I also will be just upfront, I don't consume a lot of video content. I listen to a ton of podcasts while I'm cooking or doing the laundry or whatever else, but I don't do that much YouTube at all. So
good context.
Good thing we've got you here.
Yeah, I also listen to a enormous amount of podcasts, as at some point, I don't know, within the last 6 or 7 years, I just don't enjoy music anymore for the most part.
Oh, that's sad.
I mean, it's not that I don't enjoy it. It's that I almost never like want to listen to it while I'm working or doing stuff around the house. It just feels wrong. I don't know.
I can't imagine not. Sometimes I put on music on speakers and then listen to a podcast just because I need music all the time.
Is
that insane?
I don't know about that one. That's very interesting. Thank you for sharing in a vulnerable way your very strange behavior. I appreciate it. So first I want to talk about just why, for me at least, it speaks to how I want to interact with Magic as a game, which is that I like to play Magic, obviously. I love drafting. I love limited. I don't have the commitment to really experience constructed formats in the way I would want to experience them. The way I like to like spike things, for lack of a better word, is that I would have to get so invested in a particular constructed format to be able to play at the level I want to play at and like think at the level I want to think at, that there's just it's not accessible to me unless I want to play digitally. And for those that don't know, you and I don't play any digital Magic, which is a big barrier, I think, to playing specific formats, because we have to like find a modern event at our LGS, and how often is that actually going to fire? It's a barrier to actually playing constructed Magic in a committed way.
Yeah, I played Arena for it ebbs and flows, but yeah, lately very, very little.
I did like the tutorial. I was like, this is not bringing me joy. I'm done with this. So for me, I want to be a scholar of the game. I want to understand as much about Magic as I possibly can. To borrow listener Drew's, I think, great, succinct way to describe this, I'm not a spike in the sense that I want to win as much as possible, because if that were true, I would choose a format, I would grind it out, I would practice, endlessly, I would learn the meta inside and out, and practice is a great way to get better, just like upping your win percentage, like getting all those little tiny last percentage points here and there through experience, I think is a very valuable way to actually get better at winning games of Magic. that's not actually my goal. My goal is to understand Magic. And I hope that winning is a byproduct of that. I hope the more I understand the game, the better I can do in different contexts. But I'm not as interested in those like last 2 or 3 percentage points of like really investigating a particular constructed meta or, learning a specific interaction or, matchup between two decks. That is not as compelling to me as the sort of higher level, just learning about how Magic works, the different kinds of decks you can build, how cards interact with each other, the abstract ideas like tempo and value and how they relate to one another. That's what I'm interested in. And so for me, my consumption of Magic content is like additional perspectives on the game that are not as easily accessible to me as a player. Because again, I can't just go to a Legacy event every week and grind out a bunch of Legacy, as much as that would be fun for me. So instead, I watch people that do that are committed to these formats, because I think from hearing their perspective on the game, from watching how the games play out, from hearing them do deck techs and explain how things work, it helps me understand the game better, which contextualizes my own cube construction. It tells me the kinds of things I want to seek in the game or want to avoid.
Yeah, I think part of what you're also saying is it's a difference between just playing a game for the sake of playing a game and having a hobby. And it being a hobby just means it connects to all kinds of other aspects of your life. And you really do want to have it be informed by more than just your own experience with the game.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. And it'll come up for sure that I prioritize content. I hate the word content. I prioritize videos and podcasts and articles that are also entertaining, right? Like right. If you told me here, this stream is going to make you understand the game 10% better than this other stream, but it's 50% less entertaining, I'm not going to seek that out, because I got to have a little fun along the way too, right? And luckily there's a lot of great content out there to scratch that itch.
Yeah. The other big component is, I think, that just Magic is also a way to have access or have a focal point for a community. So being able to interact with people through these channels is part of the rewarding aspects of the game.
Let's start with cube-specific content. I have a couple things here. Friend of the show, Caleb Gannon, we had him on a few episodes ago to talk about his Cube on Magic Online. I'm just a fan of Caleb's videos from YouTube. There's a lot of people that post their Cube draft videos to YouTube, and I think he's unique in a couple of ways. The first way is that his videos, I think, are a little bit more tight and tidy than other videos. There's less empty space. There's less waiting for the clock on MTGO to tick down or whatever. He's pretty good at explaining his thought process. The other thing I really like about Caleb is that he will draft a variety of decks. I find that a lot of other players that post their drafts to YouTube or whatever have a very particular deck they really like. And if you want to learn how to draft that deck, that's a great player to watch. But if you're actually trying to get a sense of how to draft the hard way, as it were, or figure out what's open at your seat, there's a lot of players that don't really do that in Vintage Cube because you don't have to. And so right. Caleb, I think, does a good job at he'll draft aggro, he'll draft control, he'll draft, whatever is open and viable. And there are certainly decks he doesn't like as much and things are under-supported or whatever. But if you look at the deck lists from the last 12 videos of his, you'll see a pretty big diversity in colors and strategy, which you won't see from other streamers. So big shout out to Caleb.
Yeah, and I think he's coming from a similar place in terms of really being interested in that kind of mastery, and not just mastery of can I draft this one deck, but can I understand this entire system. Yes,
that is a great point. He is not interested in just maximizing win percentage. He's exactly like us in the sense that he cares about understanding the game and just mastering it. There's a couple things here that I really, all the rest of my Cube content I enjoy is sometimes treat. It's not regular or things that have kind of been in and out over the years. So in terms of set reviews, my favorite audio or video set reviews are Jason Waddell's and Dom Harvey's from Riptide Lab. I really appreciate their perspective on the game because they both have a unique angle, right? Dom is, I think, the most skilled and experienced constructed Magic player that I've seen that weighs in on Cube cards from a design perspective. So I really appreciate having Dom's seasoned competitive grinder mindset and how he approaches and analyzes cards. And then Jason, I was thinking about it walking over here today. Jason is really interesting in that I feel like there's a lot of people in the Magic community, us included, where we're in it, right? We're kind of drank the Kool-Aid. This is the game we love. We're committed to it. We're going to keep making it work. Jason only likes Magic as much as it brings him joy. And if it's not bringing him joy, he just stops. And so, Jason kind of comes in and out of the Cube content creation world because sometimes the game's not giving him anything. And he's just all right, well, I'm just going to walk away and go do something else. And, I've never hit that point, but I'm not sure what else I would do anyway because I love this game so much. So I appreciate that Jason also has this it's an experienced eye, but it's also a vaguely outsider eye where he has this kind of remove that I think a lot of other people that are really deep in Magic don't often have.
I would call it extremely rational and thoughtful to be able to take a step back when it's not actually serving its purpose and not just keep doing the thing because it's how you identify yourself.
Yeah. So I really love those two perspectives in the game. And, They haven't done set reviews for I think about a year and a half, and I'm not sure if they're ever coming back, but those are good things to return to. I really like set reviews that I think have evergreen usefulness.
Right, like really providing context and explaining the rationale behind why you're doing things, because it makes that information portable.
Exactly. Like, I want to know why you think that about a card, not just what you think about a card. And I think that they do a really good job at that. So if you haven't watched your set reviews, even though Dominaria or Ravnica Allegiance or whatever came out 3 years ago, it still might be worth going back and watching those set reviews to just hear their thoughts on them, because I think they're really well structured. The other two things I really like that are kind of inconsistent are friend of the show, John Terrell's Cultic Cube YouTube channel, but honestly more his Chateau Cube podcast series, which John makes whenever he gets a guest he likes and lines up. They're kind of like, whenever. They're not on a schedule. But, I think the Cultic Cube YouTube channel is great. I recommend it to people all the time. I think the audience for it is not people like you and I that are really, really deep in the game. And so it's really like trying to make Cube accessible to other people. I think it's a fantastic way to like start understanding Cube design if you're coming from outside of Cube. Frankly, the videos are not that useful to me. Like, I'll still watch them because they're short, they're well produced, but I don't think I'm learning as much from John's videos as I learned from other non-Cube Magic sources, because I think John and I come from a very similar place, and so like I'll have an idea sort of reinforced by hearing John talk about it, or maybe like contextualize a different way. But the YouTube videos are not as much for me as I think the Chateau Cube content is, which is just interviews with people in the Magic world about Cube in some way.
For sure. And also, he's just one of the like kindest, most thoughtful guys. So
yeah, John's great. Last thing I have here is Usman Jamil's written set reviews. Again, these are things that Usman is notoriously and self-effacingly oftentimes well behind on. So I think he's behind by a few sets at this point. But he's behind because they take a long, long time to produce, because Usman is, to my knowledge, really the only player that writes these set reviews in a way that is backed up by a decent amount of playtesting experience. Like, he will play with all of these cards multiple times, give you example deck lists of these cards that they're used in. And I will say that Usman's reviews are from the kind of like power max perspective. He's trying to just suss out what are the like most powerful cards in this set for a variety of high power cubes. He's not pursuing it as much from the like sort of design perspective. So it's not the same angle I come at Cube from, but if I'm going to read any kind of power maxi kind of set review thing, it's always going to be Usman's, because it is backed up by all of that actual playtesting experience and sort of rigor behind it. So it's a voice that I like to have when I'm, considering a new set and looking at the cards in a set. It's not the only thing I care about, obviously, but those are the kinds of things that I actually seek out in the Cube world. Let's move on to more competitive oriented content. And this is, competitive in the sense that it's formats that are played competitively for stakes, either on Magic Online or in paper events that are starting to come back. This is your standard, pioneer, historic, modern, legacy kinds of formats. I got to start off just by saying that, to me, one person stands out above everybody else in the sort of content creation world, and that's just Paulo Vitor Damaderosa. He's the GOAT as far as I'm concerned. Every single article I've ever read of his, every video I've ever watched, it's coming from the same angle that I come at the game from, but with Paulo's much more experienced, much more skilled voice behind it. He's always explaining why and always seeking the answers to why things work, and spends a lot of time thinking of the subjects he's going to cover and sort of dissecting them in a very detailed way. So he's written for Channel Fireball in the past. He's written for Star City Games in the past. And when Star City Games kind of folded their whole competitive Magic content creation arm, he tried to go it solo on a Patreon and was producing articles just based on Patreon donations. And I'm a member over there, but he didn't hit a number he was comfortable with in terms of making that part of his full-time job. So he has, for now, suspended doing that, and I think he's writing for some other games at this point, but there are still a ton of great videos on his YouTube page you should watch. I would watch every single one of them if you haven't watched them. There's some that are very specific to, like, it's a deck tech on a particular standard deck, but again, because Paulo comes at this game from a very abstract, knowledge-oriented perspective, you can learn something about how Paulo says this particular deck is oriented in this standard, which is no longer the current standard. You can still learn about the game from him in every context he's talking about it, on top of having intentionally very broad topics like how to mulligan and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, the how to mulligan one I thought was particularly interesting because of how much it was like literally looking at a single deck. Would you mulligan this hand or not? but he does such a fantastic job of explaining the why that you can take that to a cube draft and be like, oh, okay, I actually have a different perspective on how to think about a mulligan, because he gives this context about what he's actually looking for in an opening hand that isn't what me, not a professional Magic player, would have expected in most of the time.
Yeah, and I think I might have said on the show before, when I watched his first mulligan video, he does the thing where he shows you a hand, talks about the deck, and says, would you keep this or not? And I always like pause the video and think about it for a second, and I was wrong every single one of them.
Yeah,
literally every
very
single
well
one.
designed, because he's not going to show you the easy ones, right?
Right.
He's really
Obviously, he's
trying to
picking ones that are kind of tricky, and so you can try and metagame it and think, well, I'm supposed to keep this hand, so he's probably going to say I'm not supposed to. But I was
and that
honest.
makes you feel very good and smug.
But I was honest with myself, and I was like, I think this is a keep, and then he explains why it's not. And I'm like, all right, I learned something today, right? And then that's what's so great about Paula's videos. So if you're interested in consuming these videos and podcasts and stuff to learn more about the game, but you haven't heard or listened to any of the stuff that we are talking about today, if you're going to seek one thing, seek Paula's videos and articles for sure. Next up, I have kind of an array of streamers that will post their streaming videos on YouTube. I honestly, like, as much as I love watching videos, my life is not conducive to actually like watching live streams. I've tried to get into it on Twitch, and I need to be able to do it on demand, and oftentimes when streamers are streaming, I'm not around to watch things. I don't like kind of jumping into stuff in the middle. It feels disjointed to me. So the way I interact with Twitch streamers is I watch their Twitch streams once they post them to YouTube. And I have like 3 here, people that I really like to watch. So the first is someone that goes by the name Aspiring Spike. He's sponsored by Channel Fireball right now, and he mostly plays Modern. The vast majority of his videos are Modern. He has dabbled in Pioneer, at least in the past few months, but mostly it's Modern. So he's a competitive player that is really interested in grinding out the Modern metagame. And each of his videos takes the format of, here is a deck that we are going to be playing. It's usually a very, very brief deck tech, which maybe is a little bit of a hurdle to get over if you're not familiar with Modern at all, and this is the first Modern content you're watching. I think he assumes a certain amount of familiarity with the format among his viewers, and so you might have to like do a little bit of catch up to sort of understand. But once you understand the vague meta of Modern, the deck techs are very brief, and it explains kind of the thing about the deck that is different that he is trying to test, right? Here's this normal deck that everyone understands to be good. Can we make it better if we make these sort of series of swaps and, make this assumption about what our opponents are going to be playing? And I usually don't watch these whole videos because the uploaded streams are obviously not edited down. They're a little more drawn out and less efficient in terms of time. So usually I'll watch the deck techs, which are very short here, then jump into a couple matches and see how things are going. Or maybe I'll have it on in the background while I'm working and I won't be really paying attention, but I'll hop in every now and then to look at it a little bit. But Aspiring Spike is great for Modern specifically, which I think is one of the more interesting formats right now in terms of diversity and trying to figure out what's actually good.
I thought it was just a bunch of Elemental Incarnation. Or
Elementals is a good deck, for sure. There's actually an Elementals deck. Like, did you know that Risen Reef is very playable in Modern specifically because of all the Evoke Elementals?
It's wild.
Yeah. They printed good enough Elementals that now Risen Reef is like a Modern staple. So that's pretty cool. And again, as a cube designer, what I'm mostly looking for here is like, here's a deck that I've never seen before. How does it tick, right? Like, what are the densities of the threats to enablers to removal to whatever? And, how does that work in this current metagame? That's what I'm looking for, and that's what I'm trying to sort of get from these videos. The next one in a very similar vein is a channel called Thraben U. This channel is much more about legacy, and the format this channel takes is patrons of this player will either send in a full, complete deck list and basically ask that the streamer play that deck list and see how it goes, or they'll send in kind of like I want this card to work. Can you build a legacy deck around this card? And like, what would that look like? And so you get more kind of strange off-meta brews. Like, these are not the typical, like, we're just going to watch Blue-Red Delver Mirrors in Legacy. It's got more sort of off-the-beaten-path stuff. But again, as a cube designer, I like seeing what kinds of things might be viable that people haven't tried and what can actually work in Legacy. So very similar channel, more about Legacy, and I would say more off-the-beaten-path kind of deck list than you're getting from Aspiring Spike. The last is just Reed Duke. Reed will play all kinds of formats on his stream, and I like watching Reed's streams because Reed is, again, a really, really skilled player, similar to Paulo Vitor Rosa. Transparently, and Reed, if you're listening, I'm sorry, not the most entertaining guy. He's very dry and monotone and deadpan, but he will describe in detail everything he is thinking and doing while he's playing, which is very helpful if you, again, are just trying to get perspective into the game from a much more skilled player. So his channel, I'll pop in if the deck he's playing looks interesting to me, or if something else piques my interest about the particular video. Reed is obviously a fantastic player and a great player to learn from. I should say, too, this is by no means a comprehensive list of like the best Magic content out there. There's a lot of streamers that I'm sure are very skilled and experienced. I just haven't ever watched, right? This is just the stuff that I've actually found my way to.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many awesome players, and it's really interesting to be playing in a time like this. This is very different from a couple years ago where we didn't just have access to all this, seeing the people's thought process in the same way as they're actually playing games.
Yeah, I mean, it's a deep, deep well of Magic stuff out there to be consumed. Quickly, the other competitive content I'm into, I really like the modern podcast Dominaria's Judgment. This is Dom Harvey and Ari Lax have a podcast that was previously on Star City Games until Star City Games suspended that as well. If you're looking for this on Google, we'll put the correct link in the show notes. There are two feeds out there. The Star City Games official feed is still out there, and it hasn't been updated since they dropped the show, but there is a new feed that does have the new episodes in it. So make sure you find the new feed. I've seen a couple people mention, oh, I'm supposed to have this podcast has gone away. It has not gone away. It's still being produced independently by Dom and Ari. They've got a Patreon out there to support their continued production of the show. I mean, I just like Dom. Dom's the entertaining guy. I think he's a skillful player, and so I like listening to him, and Ari's great too. So that's a good modern podcast. That the structure of that show is usually a rundown of modern results from the last week. So they'll actually look at all the Magic Online events, if there are any paper events, and just talk about the decks that performed well, that won events, that top aided. And then they usually cover a topic. A recent episode, they actually did do an entire episode on sideboarding, which is, a topic that as a limited player almost exclusively, I do not get any real exposure to sideboarding in a true constructed way, like designing a sideboard. But again, those things I think have a lot of bearing on cube design and also just have a lot of bearing on understanding how Magic works in general. So
right, I mean, both to how you sideboard as a player, how you could draft to kind of construct your sideboard, and as a person designing cubes, how do you design a cube that actually maybe could have more of that experience, like including cards that play those roles.
There's a YouTube channel called The Legacy Pit. This is based out of a local game store in Richmond, and they play Paper Legacy. They have like a bunch of on-meta Legacy decks available in Paper. They'll have a guest on, and they'll play some Paper Legacy matches. This is fun to watch because it's actual paper Magic, which I enjoy. I will say they don't go to any length really to explain what's happening, so if you don't know the cards, it's going to be really hard to follow. But it's a cool channel if you do know what Legacy is about and you just want to watch some matches play out. They recently did a draft, too, of I think it's a clone of the Magic Online Cube they made in Paper and drafted on their stream. So you can check that out on their YouTube channel as well. And my last one, Anthony, I got to mention Magic Aids.
We got to.
I have to. So this is a very particular channel. I would say the host is kind of like leaning into the edgelord vibe. It's the kind of channel where you've got a recurring mascot is a blow-up sex doll of Liliana.
I think you will see the thumbnails of this channel and know very quickly if it's to your taste or not.
He's been kind of blacklisted by Wizards. They won't do anything at all in any relationship to any of this content because he's got a very adult sort of theme. There's a lot of people that find it very hard to watch and actively dislike it. So it's not for everybody. If you like his whole shtick and the sort of really fast talking and the dirty jokes and the having a gross nickname for every card he's playing, then you'll enjoy it even more. But I do have to give a shout out to the fact that I wish more people made videos structured like his videos, because he will basically cover a deck tech and an entire 5-match league with that deck, mostly modern, though sometimes other formats, and it'll be like a 12-minute video, partially because he talks really fast, but also he edits it down to a way that I think is really digestible and shows you just the important points, right? Like, here's the deck, here's what we're trying to prove, or here's what I think makes this deck good. Let's jump into the actual games, and you see the pivot points of those games. You don't see every single turn, you don't see everything that's going on. You see, mulligan decisions, pivot points, and then the outcome of those games. The structure is great, and I do wish that more people would make videos like that with maybe a different brand so that more people could get behind it. But if you can stomach it, or like me, I kind of like it. What can I say? I think it's kind of fun.
In very small doses, I think it's very funny.
I think it's pretty fun. I will say he recently released a video that was a different format. He was trying to make the case for how modern had been changed dramatically in a bad way. And I think he wanted to reach a broader audience with it. And so he slowed down his voice. And I found it unwatchable.
It was very, very disconcerting.
Because he talks really fast, and I'm sure he gets comments all the time that are like, I can't understand what you're saying. Why don't you slow this down? And instead of actually just talking slower, it sounds like he definitely just recorded it normally and then went into an audio editor and just stretched it out. And so that one's rough. But I would check out any of his videos. I mean, this guy's also a skilled deck builder, it's worth noting. As I understand it, he was the person that kind of discovered the 4-color humans deck or 5-color humans deck that ended up becoming very potent and modern for a few years there before Modern Horizons 2 came along. So this is not just some schlub content creator. He's like a very skilled and interesting deck builder that is also making edgelord videos with Liliana sex dolls. So maybe that's for you, listener. I do not know. Moving on to more casually oriented Magic content. I think this is where you are going to have more things, maybe, Anthony.
I definitely enjoy a lot of things that are a little bit more adjacent to the game, or, just taking it from different angles. It's not just how do you optimize and become the best player. I have to say, I think my number one Magic podcast right now pretty easily is Good Luck High Five.
Yeah.
Are you also a listener?
I've been listening to that show for a while, and it's one of the best produced Magic shows out there, period.
Yeah, and for some reason, we were even talking about this a couple weeks ago. We were both just like, has this show just gotten so much better recently? I've also been listening for years, but I feel like they've really come into their stride. They talk about a lot of formats, but it's more, they do a lot of improv. They'll take cards and do silly games with them and things like that, and they're just fun, smart people that I enjoy listening to.
Yeah, this is Megan Wolf and Maria Bartoldi. Megan has a somewhat storied history as a competitive Magic player. Megan plays very well in some high-level tournaments. Maria works for coverage and does a lot of work for Wizards, so they're both very deeply connected to the game. And like you said, it's not about a specific format, it's just about Magic in general. They will cover any relevant news that's going on in the game at a high level, but they also, they have a segment every week where they show each other a random card artwork from Scryfall and try and figure out what the card is or guess what the card might do from an artwork they don't recognize. And it's just, they have a really great, charismatic, they're just entertainers, right? They're entertainers in a way that almost nobody else on this list is. That makes the show a lot more listenable.
Yeah, and they also have another short podcast every week called The Upkeep, where they just do Magic news. So
that show,
if that's what you're looking for.
That show is like such a great service to the Magic community. It's so hard to keep up with what's going on in Magic because there's only so many things that come from Wizards officially, and you can, I guess, follow their blog if you wanted to know what was going on there. But there's also so much stuff that happens in Magic that is not coming down from Wizards directly. It's like happening in the community at large. And to follow all that stuff, you have to follow a bunch of people on Twitter or check the subreddits, or it's hard to stay on top of it. And, Megan and Maria and whatever producers they have do that work for you and produce a under 10-minute show every week that is just, here's the news about Magic. And it's a very efficient show. It's very tight. Doesn't have a bunch of improv bits, but their charisma still carries it and makes it a very fun listen for 10 minutes.
Another big one that I've been listening to for years and years is Drive to Work. This is a podcast that Mark Rosewater does literally, at least,
before the
pandemic, on his drive to work, would just say, I'm going to start driving and I'm going to talk about some subject until I get to work. A thing I love about the game is just the depth of it and all the other sort of things that it touches. So he'll talk about the design of cards, the design of sets, but then he'll also go off and just talk about how the cards are physically printed and what the distribution channels are like and what their HR team does, and all kinds of things that are sort of adjacent to Magic, which for me, that's one of the reasons I just love learning about anything. Is you start from one point, but then you get to learn how complex and interconnected it is with everything else. So for me, this has just been an awesome podcast, and I don't listen necessarily every week. He actually does 2 a week, but whenever there's an interesting topic, it's something I really enjoy. He also, like Magic Gates, has a very specific flavor to the way that he talks.
It's not the same flavor as Magic Gates. We have to be clear.
Extremely wholesome, a little bit goofy flavor.
Goofy enthusiasm, I would say, is what we get. For example, Mark has done whole episodes of the Drive to Work podcast where he attempts to embody a color. And he goes I'm white. I love rules.
Maybe pick a different color.
Okay, that's a good point. I'm red. I'm so impulsive and passionate. He commits to the bit. He really very, very enthusiastic about the game, and that's what you have to be to record. I think it's almost 800 or 900 episodes of his podcast at this point. The man is just a machine. I don't quite understand how he does it. I agree. I don't listen every week. I definitely jump in whenever I think it's an interesting topic for me to listen to. My favorite thing from Drive to Work is hearing about the stuff that didn't get printed, or the behind the scenes stories of here's how this thing came to get printed that maybe shouldn't have been printed or whatever.
Right, yeah.
I think that's a very interesting perspective on how Wizards is shepherding the game to be what they want it to be, right? Here's a thing that happened that was actually not what we wanted for whatever reason. Here was the mistakes we made with Time Spiral when we tried to do the color shifted cards or whatever. Hearing those stories, I think, really helps me contextualize the sort of full history of Magic cards, which we, of course, as cube designers have access to. We can play anything we want. And knowing the sort of roles those different cards and sets have played in Magic's history, I think puts those cards in a different light for me, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, I think very much the sense that I get is in the episodes that are actually about magic design, about game design, he tends to talk to the listener as if they are like a new hire or intern at Wizards of the Coast who is just getting up to speed on designing their first set. Like, that's who I think he's talking to. And as a cube designer, that's kind of who I imagine myself to a degree. So.
Yeah. That's the other sort of maybe downside of that show. He does do a great job making any episode accessible. I'm confident in saying if you've never listened before, you can pick any episode that sounds interesting to you and you will have no trouble following it because he is always setting the table completely. If you listen to every single show, every single week, you will hear a lot of the same things repeated over and over again.
That is
because
true.
Once you know those things, you are on the inside, and he makes the show for anybody to come listen to. And so it can be very repetitive if you are very experienced with Magic or you've listened to the show a lot. You'll hear him give the same sort of context a lot. I want to give a quick shout out to the Loading Ready Run pre-releases. These are actually some of the only things I will watch live if I can. This is, Loading Ready Run is a big, broad sort of gaming Twitch channel. They play a lot of Magic, but also other games, and they have a relationship with Wizards of the Coast where they get paper cards before anybody else does, a week before the pre-release or a couple days before the pre-release, and we'll do a live stream where they play equivalently a pre-release. They'll play sealed pools, they'll build decks and play them out, and they always have different guests on from other parts of the Magic community. It's just a fun show to watch. I really enjoy. It always comes along at that point in the sort of set being released where everyone is still speculating wildly about how good or bad cards might be. And so it's fun to actually see them in play for the first time as far as the public is concerned, right? Like, it's something a little special to me about, like, there it is. That's the first time this card has been cast that the public is aware of outside of the R&D department at Wizards. I think it's pretty fun. And it's nice to just also get a perspective into a bunch of other streamers and, content creators that they're going to bring on as sort of a rotating cast as a little bit of a lens into this world if you're not familiar with it.
Yeah, and I think they're also just a group of, again, very charismatic, fun to watch people.
Yep, for sure.
So since we were actually on an episode of the Guardian Project a little while ago, and I've actually just been a consistent listener since then. I don't play a ton of Commander, but it was sort of a thing where every week I thought, I kind of want, like, it would come up in my feed, and I think, yeah, I'll listen to that, and I'd like to hang out with those guys, and I've just kept going until I've become a faithful listener.
Yeah, I don't know how I actually found the Guardian Project. I have to look back and figure it out, but I did find it before we had them on the show. That was how we sort of arranged that sort of guest situation, but we had them on the show, like we said, because they have a very similar approach to the game, even though they're playing a very different format than we do. I had never heard anybody in the sort of Commander content world talk about, like, this deck's too good, I have to make it worse. Or, like, I realize that if people aren't having fun, then my deck is doing something wrong. And I have to, like, they're building their decks with the goal of fun for the entire table, which is similar in the sense that we're building our cubes with the idea of fun for the entire table. It's obviously got a lot of differences, but like you said, they're nice dudes, pleasure to listen to, and they do have a perspective on the game that I appreciate. So I've also listened to quite a bit.
Yeah. The last Magic podcast I listen to consistently is Color of Magic. This is Daquan Watson and Brian Allen, and they talk a lot about sort of their experience as people of color in the Magic space. And I mean, it was recommended on Good Luck High Five. They just said, if you want more different voices, different experiences in your Magic content, go listen to them. And I did, and still a listener today. The last thing we have to give a huge shout out to is Sam at Ristic Studies, who just produces some of the most, how do you even sum it up? Just some of the most gorgeous, beautiful, thoughtful videos about Magic. And I think he, more than anyone, is emblematic of what we love about the game as a medium to explore other aspects of our community and culture.
Yeah, I mean, Sam's videos are about Magic, but they're not about Magic as a game. They're about Magic as a cultural artifact, as a venue for art, as a venue for creative writing, as a venue for creativity. I enjoy his videos. To me, they're in a totally different category. I do not watch Sam's videos to contextualize my cube design, to understand the game better in the way that I'm describing. I watch them because it's another interesting perspective on this thing that is a big part of my life. Last thing I have is I do want to shout out the professor from Tulare Community College's latest YouTube series called Shuffle Up and Play. Most of the professor's content is not for me. Everyone's got their own thing. But Shuffle Up and Play is a new paper one-on-one YouTube series. There's endless Commander YouTube series out there now. It's become very popular in the wake of game nights to just have a Commander stream where you play paper Commander and to varying degrees of production quality. And I've always been like, I mean, great. I'm glad Commander is very popular, but I would love any of that energy to go into any other constructed format, right? Like, I want to see people playing Modern, playing Standard from 20 years ago, playing Legacy, playing whatever. And that's exactly what Shuffle Up and Play is. It's heads up Magic between two decks that the professor has chosen for his special guest to play against each other. And there's a couple other little bits going on there, but what it mostly is again, just sort of, here's a particular matchup. We're going to watch paper Magic play out between these two different decks. The video I would start with there for sure is Cedric Phillips and Patrick Sullivan playing the Birthing Pod Splinter Twin Mirror from Modern of years ago. Both these cards now banned. I would argue both these cards probably not even that good in Modern now that we have Modern Horizons 2. I'm not even sure how much play they would even see, but they're banned because at some point they were deemed too good or, not the kinds of play patterns Wizard wanted. And so here's these two decks that are banned in Modern now that are seeing sort of the play they used to see, back a decade ago or whenever that was.
Also, I mean, just their genuine friendship is just such a delight to watch. So that episode in particular, I really would recommend.
Yeah, in terms of content I really missed the Resleevables. That was one of my favorite Magic podcasts that also got burned by the SCG content thing and Cedric leaving and everything. But that podcast was great, and I hope they bring it back someday. I'm not sure if they're going to find time to do it or a production team, but that show was fantastic. I do want to mention two things that I haven't actually watched or listened to, but have been on my list for a long time, and I just got to find time to fit them in. And that's Sam Black has a podcast that I think I would really enjoy. I haven't actually listened to it yet, but I know Sam has a similar knowledge-oriented perspective on the game and is trying to understand things at a deep level. So that's a podcast I've been meaning to check out. The other one I've been meaning to check out is the Canadian Highlander podcast North 100. This is a show that I've seen recommended a bunch all over the place, and Canadian Highlander is a format that actually really interests me. There's not a Canadian Highlander culture or meta in our local play group. I've never seen anybody with a Canadian Highlander deck, but this is 100 card singleton, no commander or anything, no color identity limitations, and it also has no ban list. Instead, it has a point system, which is more complicated certainly, and it makes it way harder to do a deck check and make sure your deck is legal because you don't know until you look at the entire deck. But basically, the most powerful cards are worth a certain number of points, and you only get to use a certain number of points on your deck. While that has all the limitations I mentioned, that's a really interesting way to think about restricting card access to a deck. So you can just play Black Lotus in Canadian Highlander if you want. It costs you whatever percentage of your points of these powerful cards, but anything is playable, pretty much. I don't think you can play the conspiracy cards or whatever.
It's sort of a twist in the ban list where there is no ban list technically. You can play with any individual card if you want, while still trying to regulate some of the more degenerate things that can make the format less fun.
Right, and I've talked to a lot of Cube curators that find this to be the constructed format they love the most because it's similar to Cube, is kind of like Eternal. There's not going to be a ban list that's going to come along and say, now this card is banned, your whole deck is out of the meta or whatever. It's Singleton, which, is great for all the reasons we love Singleton. And there's just a broad diversity of decks you can play. I understand that you can play fast combo, you can play control, you can play aggro, you can play stacks or hate bears or whatever. I think it's got a wide variety of things that are playable. And it's also just then you have your deck, right? That you can just play one-on-one against somebody whenever without having to worry about all of the sort of hang-ups of a constructed metagame. So that's a format I'd like to get into, possibly. I've thought about getting into for a while, but haven't gotten there. And North 100, I hear, is a great podcast for it. That was a lot more than I thought we would get to be honest. I was like, how many things are there really? I made my list, you made your list. There's a lot of stuff out there that we're listening to. If you have something that you think is great, that is aligned with our values that we're not listening to, shoot us an email, shoot us a tweet, post it on the subreddit or in the Discord so we can follow up and find something new that we love.
Yeah, I always have more laundry and dishes to do and need more podcasts to listen to while I do them.
I know you want to talk about the James Webb Space Telescope, and I do as well.
I'm going to lose my ability to use full sentences. I'm so excited. If you're
telescope,
listening,
fun,
telescope,
light,
so
space.
good, space. If you're listening to this episode the day it comes out on Monday, tomorrow is the day that the very first images from the James Webb Space Telescope are being released to the public.
Specifically, the first scientific images.
Correct.
We have seen calibration images. We've seen we confirmed this sensor's
some
working.
silly test images that show galaxies we've never
Right.
been able to
Yeah.
possibly see before. So
Just
I
to
can't
calibrate the
imagine
sensors.
what this is going to look like. If you'll indulge me, I would love to talk for just a minute about why I think this telescope is such an absolute marvel and literally the most important thing that humanity is doing right now.
Yes, I do want to say first, there's going to be a live stream, 10:30 a.m. Eastern on Tuesday. So if you want to watch this stuff live, as I will certainly be doing, you can find that on NASA's social media or whatever. But it's 10:30 a.m. the day after this podcast comes out.
So exciting. So this is a project that's been going on for years. This is literally something that started when I was in high school in 1996 or something, I think was the first sort of idea where they put something on paper and said, hey, maybe we should build this new telescope.
That's cool, but you definitely were not in high school in 1996. You went to high school at about 2004.
I remember being in
2003.
high school. Yes, no, you're right. I'm just saying, when I was in high school, this is something I had heard about and
it was going on. That's right.
excited about. And then in college, even more so,
I remember
was
talking about it with you in college.
Yeah, a concrete design. We got to see what it was going to look like, and it looked bizarre and wild, unlike, the sort of tube design of a telescope we had seen before. It was this weird object. But there's something that's really cool about it, that it's not just the successor to the Hubble. It's not just a next bigger telescope. It's actually something extremely novel to do something that we actually can't do with any of the telescopes that we have. And it takes a couple things that you have to understand in order to put those together. The fact that the universe is expanding is important. We got to understand Doppler shift, and we have to understand a little bit about black body radiation. Can I take you through those?
You definitely can. Maybe I can give like the more layman's perspective. People I think are probably familiar with the Doppler effect when it comes to sound, right?
Yeah.
This is just the idea that like if a car or a motorcycle or an airplane is coming at you and then it passes you, the quality of the sound changes. And that's because the speed of sound is actually not that fast. And so if something's moving at a reasonable speed, the sound waves get collapsed before it. So they're kind of higher pitch and, pitched up when it's coming at you. And then as it's going away, the sound waves are getting stretched out the other direction because the thing that's creating the sound is moving away from the direction the sound is going, and it actually gets deeper.
Yeah, so
I did not know that also happened with light, and it kind of blew my mind when you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, light is the same thing. It's just waves. So if you have an object moving away from you, things will get stretched out into deeper and deeper red colors. Or if something's coming towards you, it gets compressed into these higher energy, shorter wavelength blue colors.
I guess if you had asked me, I would have said, like, sure, that makes sense. But I never would have been able to conceive of things that were moving fast enough for that to be noticeable.
Yeah, well, the further you look out into the universe, because the universe, for some crazy reason, something to do with dark energy, is expanding, the further you look out into the universe, the quicker things are moving away from us. So things get stretched out into redder and redder light, and eventually just drops off into this horizon because it's moving faster away from us than the speed of light, and you literally can't see it anymore. What the James Webb Space Telescope is able to do is actually look deep almost to that horizon until just a few million years after the formation of the universe, because we're also actually looking backwards in time as we look deeper into the universe, because light takes time to travel. So when you're looking at something, you're looking at an impression of it from however long it took for the light to get here.
You're always looking at the past,
You're always
dude.
looking at the past. So all that put together is very cool. This is going to look deep into the universe, deep in space, deep in time. But there's a little bit of a problem when it comes to black body radiation, which is that everything in the universe that has some temperature is glowing. If you've heard about light bulbs that have a temperature, that's not a metaphor or anything. That is literally the temperature of the filament that makes that particular light. Maybe you've experienced this if you've put something on a hot stove for too long and it turns sort of a glowing orange red. But then as it gets hotter and hotter, it starts turning into this whiter or eventually even bluer light as you're getting more and more of this high energy light.
If you've done that on your stove, I've got concerns.
You're doing some cool smelting or
I've
something.
got some concerns.
Imagine, a blacksmith putting a hot rod into a fire. But what's really cool is that doesn't just happen to things that we consider as hot. Things that are relatively cool, your body temperature or everything on the Earth is also glowing just in wavelengths of light that we can't see, in infrared light. And that's exactly how infrared cameras work. They're just looking at this wavelength of light and seeing, again, literally the temperature of things, because everything that is a particular temperature will glow at that same distribution of light.
And we almost certainly evolved to not see that because it would be very distracting and it wouldn't help us at all.
So here's where the problem is. We want to look deep into these infrared light because the light's been stretched out by the Doppler shift, but everything around us is glowing in this infrared light, including telescopes and cameras, the actual equipment that the camera's made of. So if it's also glowing at that same frequency, it's not going to work as a camera because it's just going to be seeing all the interference from itself. Mm-hmm. So we have to get this camera extremely, extremely cold. So cold it doesn't make any of this infrared light interfere with the actual camera.
More cold than makes any sense with your normal lifetime experience.
And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to put it out into space that's really cold, but we have a problem that there's all these bodies. We have the Earth, the Sun, and the Moon that are shedding off a lot of light that are going to heat up that telescope. So what are we going to do to get over that?
I mean, you asking me to answer the question?
Yeah, go for it.
Or just say, what, Anthony? What are we going to do?
Be my Robert Krulwich. We're going to put it out into space, not just in orbit around the Earth, but in orbit around the Earth in this bizarre spot called the Lagrange 2 point, which is way out, way beyond the orbit of the Moon. And at this point, where it can sort of hover, balanced out by gravity and the centripetal force. And what's actually going to happen is the Earth and the Moon and the Sun are all in that orbit going to be in the same direction. Right?
Yes, the closest celestial bodies that are going to be giving off the most problematic glow will all be behind the telescope.
And because they're all in the same direction, we can build a huge heat shield to protect the telescope from all that light that's coming off these different celestial bodies. And that's how we're actually going to keep our super awesome, cool telescope extremely cool.
I like to picture it, everybody sees the James Webb and they picture these like beautiful glowing gold hexagons and everything. But in actuality, if you were to ever look at it,
it's extremely dark.
It would just be like the heat shield, this weird quadrilateral made of foil, and then just pure black on the other side. Like nothing to see there because there's literally no light hitting it or very, very imperceptible light because otherwise it wouldn't work.
It's just so fascinating to me to think about scientists sitting down with this problem. We can make this telescope, but we need to make it so cold. How are we going to do that? And someone coming up with, well, there's this one weird point in space that we can balance this object and then just put up a cover. We'll just get as much shade as we can up there.
Mm-hmm. And then all of the sort of little tiny thrusters that will try and keep it in balance in orbit, because the orbit is not fully sustainable, or it is theoretically fully sustainable, but it's not actually possible to put it at exactly the right point. So it's going to wobble a little bit, and eventually, in 30 or 40 or 100, I don't know, I forget what the timeline is. It is going to fall out of orbit at some point.
Yeah, the actual project timeline, I think, was 10 years, and that was the amount of fuel they gave it and expected it to live, although hopefully it'll last a lot longer than that.
Yeah, so it does have these little thrusters, but those are, of course, on the other side of the heat shield, because that's going to give off a lot of black body radiation.
Yeah, the other challenge there, this is getting a little bit deep, but it's actually moving around in that orbit in a very specific orbit that prevents the shadows from the Earth and the Moon, like an eclipse you would see from crossing across that heat shield, because even though colder is better, they also want it to be really consistent so all those instruments are balanced. So it's got a weird, crazy orbit that I would never begin to know how to understand as a person that didn't do great at Kerbal Space Program.
Those are the two things I always tell people when they're like, I've heard of this space telescope, but I have no idea why I should be interested in it. I'm like, well, let me tell you about the Doppler effect of light and the fact that it's actually going to see things we have never seen before because the light was never measurable to us. And also tell you about the fact that it has to be in this little dark corner of space that's as far from us as possible while still being within communication range and in some sort of stable orbit for this to work.
There's something kind of beautiful about just creating that quiet little dark spot in space for this little machine to
just
work.
Get little tiny photons that have been launched from stars a gazillion million years ago.
And yeah, it is also huge. Like, as far as comparing it to previous generations of telescopes, it is massive. It's so big that we couldn't fit the one lens into one rocket payload. So instead, it's built of this tessellation of hexagonal beryllium mirrors that are gold plated, and we had to fold them all up into this one rocket and then unfold them over weeks and weeks. We should say this was launched back in December, right? And
we talked about it in the show back then, yeah.
Just now about to start doing science.
What's the point of having a podcast if you can't monologue about the James Webb Space Telescope for 10 minutes at the end?
Do we have more time? Can we keep going?
You can keep going if you want. I mean, I do have to edit this all this afternoon, but sure.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited because it will fundamentally change our understanding of cosmology, of the way the universe was created. And that's why, to me, I think this is legitimately the most important thing that we are doing as humans, because what else are we supposed to be doing out here other than just learning and understanding? And this is a huge new opportunity. The other thing is that in addition to looking deep into space, it's also going to be able to look at nearby stuff. We're going to get whole new perspectives on planets and other objects within our solar system.
Nearby in big air quotes.
Big quotes. It's also going to be able to look at exoplanets, planets that we think might actually be places we could find other life. So we're going to use all kinds of instruments to try and measure what the atmospheres and orbits and all kinds of other aspects of nearby planets. And yeah, that could also just change our sort of sense of our role in the universe.
So tune in tomorrow, Tuesday, 10:30 a.m. for the first pictures of alien life. That's the Lucky Paper Radio promise. We're going to see what these little green skinny guys look like.
It struck me really hard a couple weeks ago because this sort of search for extraterrestrial life feels so big and abstract and like whatever, this has been happening and nothing ever comes from it. But this is such a leap in terms of the kinds of instrumentation we have. We could legitimately have evidence in like the next year of pretty good evidence of extraterrestrial life.
Yeah, it's going to be not going to be a bazillion million light years away. Such that it's like, it means, and it's still going to be an idea, mostly. It's
not going to be a picture of a little green man. It's going to be a picture of, look at this spectrum. We don't have another way to explain why this particular planet is emitting this frequency except for a certain organic molecule that we think only could be formed by intelligent life in the atmosphere absorbing certain light frequencies. It's going to take a lot of work to unpack the information that would lead to potentially pretty concrete and conclusive evidence of extraterrestrial life, but that's still cool, even if it's just complex spectral analysis.
Here's a fun. I'm going to regret making this podcast longer. I do have to edit the whole thing, but here's an interesting thought experiment. If, let's say, theoretically, in 9 months, we do have what scientists consider to be conclusive evidence of extraterrestrial life on some planet 5,000 light years away or whatever. It's such that it's so far enough away that like there's no, like everyone agrees we're never going to interact with these things on the entire span of humanity. Like we will be consumed by the sun before we could ever reach them or communicate with them in any way. But we know they're there. And they probably know we're here.
Maybe.
Does that change anything about life on planet Earth? For example, is anybody who comes from a religious tradition that, you know, would not be compatible with aliens going to have their mind changed? I mean, it's one in a long string of things that, you know, wouldn't be compatible with that religious history. I'm just wondering, like, whose mind would be like blown by that in a way that would mind actually be blown?
I'm raising my hand. Yeah. I mean it would be...
I know, I'm convinced that there's life out there, right? And we just haven't been able to see it. And so if we see it, I'll be like, we found it. Great. I'm not going to be like, I don't think, I mean, I guess depending on what we actually find, but it would not shock me for us to discover some sort of evidence of extraterrestrial life.
It wouldn't shock me, but just this change of, again, thinking of something that's sort of abstract and vague to here it is. I think that would totally change a lot of people's perspectives on the universe.
Yeah, it's probably like the pale blue dot thing where it's like just actually seeing the Earth from a remove, even though we've known it's a sphere floating in space for a long time, but just actually seeing it is like, oh,
yeah,
we're just living on that little ball and we're
I mean, and as far as the way other people will perceive it, I mean, for me, as a person that likes to think of themselves as a person of science, having my mind changed is like the most valuable thing that can happen, right? Because when you're proven wrong, you suddenly become more right about stuff. So I would be delighted. And I think that we've seen, you know, people that have different ways of understanding the universe. Science has still changed the reality of things, the reality of what we know exist. And that's changed the way things have been interpreted and the way that those kinds of ideological tools are used. But I don't think it means a complete reversal for anybody. So hopefully no one would panic.
I'm just curious. I don't think people are going to panic. I'm just curious about like the idea of, in a lot of ways, we know it's there, but it's never going to materially affect us is irrelevant to so many people's worldview, right? So many people don't care about a thing that won't materially affect them. And so it's like, will they actually care when all of a sudden it's other life, right? And like, obviously there's going to be a long, you know, panoply of deniers for various reasons. I mean, people that deny we even landed on the moon. So like, you're never going to get everybody, right? You're not going to convince the world there's aliens until they're like on their doorstep, because vaporizing them.
It literally will take, like, you'd have to spend years learning about how this information actually has to be interpreted to be able to say, oh, I intuitively understand why this is proof of life. That's not something that the average person is going to be able to do. It's just going to be some weird numbers.
Maybe the best thing it could do would be convince some people in some sort of middle ground to believe more fervently that we should be investing in this kind of research. Because I think there's a lot of very reasonable arguments that are like not coming from people that are malicious or bad faith actors or whatever to like not invest in space telescopes.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Right? I mean, for a long time, transparently, like through high school and most of college, I was like, why are we blasting a bunch of resources off into space? Like why are we landing on the moon? This is stupid. Why are we doing this at all? And it took me, you know, having to learn a lot more about it to be like, actually, this is the only way we can invent anything that is not a new weapon. This is the only way. This is the only way money gets spent to invent anything new that isn't going to blow people to smithereens. And so we should just invest in that as much as possible, because that's just how new things happen. Is like you have to set some overly ambitious goal for yourself in order to like push the boundaries of what's possible. Right? That's how we got the microwave. That's how we got all these things we wouldn't otherwise have.
We should do more space telescopes. And if you're a physicist or engineer or anything and I've screwed up, let us know. I'd love talking about this.
Anthony loves to be wrong. That's another opportunity to be right, or whatever you said. I forget what it was.
Something like that.
The classic saying that Anthony has said. That's going to be it for Lucky Paper Radio. A little bit of an indulgent episode, but you know, we put it at the end. People can skip it. That's why we have timestamps. All of our music is produced by DJ James Nasty. All the Magic cards are produced by Wizards of the Coast. This show is produced by Anthony and I, thinking real hard about magic and then speaking into microphones about it. Thank you for talking about magic and space telescopes with me, Anthony.
Yeah, thanks for talking about space telescopes with me.
It's really fun to talk about, I think.
There's so much other stuff that's so cool about this telescope.
I love the videos of them in the super ultra clean room polishing the beryllium mirrors multiple times. Like, how do you manufacture the cloth you're going to wipe it off with the last time? Where does that cloth
That's
come from?
horrifying to think about. Yeah, at some point, someone had to do the last.
Yeah.
Someone did the last wipe.
The last wipe did happen at some point. With some cloth, they had probably spent a lot of money to like design and manufacture themselves so that it would leave absolutely nothing behind and wouldn't chemically mess with anything.
Wild.
Anyway.
I want that cloth.
Just to wipe your glasses off. That's the kind of thing they could auction that off after it was done. It's already out there. We've already used these cloths. Now, if you want the world's nicest cloth to do whatever, put it on eBay. Fund more space research.
May contain some berylliums.
Little berylliums. I hope not, actually. That'd be bad.